Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on NeffordsRadio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, how you doing, everybody? Welcome to the second of the pre-taped podcasts that I've put together without a date. Yes, I won't be here to remind you exactly what day it is. I think you'll have to depend on your own skills to look that up on a calendar today. It can be any day you like, as a matter of fact, and if you're listening to the show on podcast, who cares what day it is? It could be days later that you're finally listening to it. But as you know, I have taken the family on the road for an end of the summer vacation, but I didn't want to leave you entirely in the lurch without any new material. We'll be excited, of course, to get back to our live shows, or our nearly live shows, very shortly. But there's an awful lot that we have in our archives, in our pocket archives, that deserves to be dug back up and discussed, and things we missed the first time around, stuff we may even have talked about, but some additional information has come to light. I thought I might start off, as a matter of fact, following up on the last of our podcasts with a little bit of information on Sebastian Gorka that I didn't manage to shoehorn into the... I don't want to spend the whole day on Sebastian Gorka again, but a couple of little tidbits. And then, of course, kind of an interesting piece here from Politico about the fact that he and his wife both are kind of tag-teaming the national security arena. Well, let's start with the smaller items here. These were two weird things here. You'll recall that I mentioned to you that Gorka got himself in trouble walking into National Airport with a loaded gun on him. We learned a Browning 9mm that he forgot he had with him when he was trying to get on a flight. Don't really know what motivated him to bring it with him, but he says he and his family have been getting death threats, so whatever. This was from before he came on board with the Trump administration and before there was a Trump administration. But this interesting tidbit just arose in April of this year, and I put it away, and I don't think I ever got to mention it. I guess one of the first entries from Andrew Kaczynski at his new K-File perch at CNN. Wikipedia user, this all gives it away in the headline, Wikipedia user SK Gorka, okay, edited info about White House aide Sebastian Gorka's gun charge. How interesting is that? And really, there's no reason for him to falsify anything about the gun charge. He ended up more or less getting away with it. All he had to do was stay on good behavior during his probationary period, and the charges ended up being dismissed. But I don't know. I guess he was anxious about it at some point earlier. A Wikipedia user who goes by SK-Gorka. I don't know what the K is, but how many Gorkas are there running around? And of course, although his wife's name is Catherine, and is it with a K or with a C? I can look it up because I have that other one. Yeah, it is Catherine Gorka with a K. So SK-Gorka. So I guess maybe they both use the same. It's possible they use the same Wikipedia account, if they use it for anything other than editing Wikipedia entries about themselves. A Wikipedia user who goes by SK-Gorka has extensively edited the Wikipedia page of White House aide Sebastian Gorka, including a section on criminal charges he faced for bringing a firearm into a Washington, D.C. airport. It is unclear if the user is connected to Gorka. Gorka did not respond to a request for comment. The user, however, has only made edits on the pages of Gorka and his wife, Catherine Gorka, which I can now see was here for me to discover without having to venture out into the wider world to find out that it begins with a K. Those edits include adding photos and information about Gorka's policy speeches and books. The user created the page for Catherine Gorka. She's just not important enough to have her own page, so fine, she created her own. That's what people do with Wikipedia. A Wikipedia editor flagged the user's edits in August as potentially violating the site's conflict of interests guidelines, which discourage users from editing pages to which they have a personal connection. I guess you're not supposed to do that with Wikipedia, but people do it. An editor's note currently sits at the top of the page warning, the neutrality of this article is disputed. In November, following Trump's victory, S.K. Gorka edited a section about a January 2016 incident in which Gorka was charged with bringing a handgun through security at Washington National Airport. The user moved the incident from the introduction of his biography to the bottom of his page. The section concerning the gun incident is now completely gone, though it's not clear who removed it. The details, I thought everything was supposed to be perfectly clear about who did what in Wikipedia. Oh well. The details of the charge were also changed by the user, S.K. Gorka, to include Gorka's explanation of the incident and removed a clause that stated that the charge could carry a jail sentence, though it's true that it did. S.K. Gorka also added a sentence about how bringing firearms through airport security by accident is a common phenomenon. That is true. He's not wrong. Trademark. The charge was dismissed this year under a plea in which Gorka was required to exhibit good behavior for 6 months. Too bad about not actually holding him to that. Here's how the incident read before the edit. It used to say, Gorka is currently awaiting sentencing at 9:30 a.m. on 3 February 2017 after pleading guilty in Arlington County Circuit Court on 8 August 2016 to a weapons charge for illegally carrying a firearm in the terminal at Reagan National Airport on 31 January 2016. He faces up to 1 year in prison. And here's how S.K. Gorka changed it when it was moved to the bottom. It subsequently read, Gorka is awaiting sentencing at 9:30 a.m. on 3 February 2017 after pleading guilty in Arlington County Circuit Court on 8 August 2016 to a weapons charge for illegally carrying a firearm in the terminal at Reagan National Airport on 31 January 2016. Okay, so far so good. He accidentally brought the wrong bag to the airport and didn't realize his gun was in it because he's got great sense of where his weapon is at all times. He's totally aware of it. I love that excuse from people. Okay, he also said, in 2015, TSA discovered 2,653 firearms in carry-on bags at airport checkpoints across the country, the majority of whom cite as a reason that they forgot their gun was in the bag. Yes, that is the most common excuse, and it is great evidence of how stupid and careless people really are with their guns, and likewise, great evidence of how stupid and careless Sebastian Gorka is with his gun. It's no different in that sense. I'll give him that. He's not wrong. Many gun owners are too stupid to be trusted with their weapons, and Sebastian Gorka, I guess, has gotten around to admitting that he is one of them. All right. There's also one other little tidbit here that I have from Newsweek. It's actually predates this one. This one's from February 23rd of 2017. Jeff Stein has this one exclusive. Listen to the controversial White House terrorism advisor Sebastian Gorka's angry call to a critic. I do not know if we will actually listen to it. I don't know how long it is. I also don't know if it's safe for on the air now that I think about it. But let's look at the story. It has been updated, and it begins by reading an embattled White House terrorism advisor whose academic credentials have come under widespread fire, telephoned one of his main critics at home Tuesday night, this was way back in February, and threatened legal action against him, Newsweek has learned. Sebastian Gorka, whose views on Islam have been widely labeled extremist, called noted terrorism expert Michael S. Smith II in South Carolina. We did read about him. He was one of the folks we mentioned the other day, and expressed dismay that Smith had been criticizing him on Twitter, according to a recording of the call provided to Newsweek. I was like a deer in the headlights. Smith, a Republican who has advised congressional committees on the use of social media by the Islamic State militant group, whom they helpfully tell us is also known as ISIS, parenthetically, thank you, and Al-Qaeda, of course, tells Newsweek. Of course, that was a sort of a choppy delivery there. It is Smith telling Newsweek, not Al-Qaeda telling Newsweek, but he advises committees on the social media use by ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And he also tells Newsweek, there we go, I thought it was a prank. He began by threatening me with a lawsuit. Gorka apparently used his personal cell phone with a Northern Virginia area code. That would probably be, I'm not certain which one it is. I was going to give it away. It's 703 is the, I know Greg didn't recognize the daily 202, right? The 202 was the area code for Washington, D.C. 703 is the Northern Virginia area code, although, there's also another one for cell phones too. So it could be like a 573. So just if you want to be in the know, I'll tell you what the Northern Virginia area codes are. Anyway, he used his personal cell phone rather than making the call from his White House office or government-issued cell phone, where it would have been officially logged, Smith says. The terrorism expert says he suspected Gorka, quote, was trying to conceal the call. I don't really know how well he was going to do with that. Smith said he did not begin recording the call until after Gorka allegedly threatened to sue Smith. In an email to Newsweek, Smith said that Gorka asserted my tweets about him merited examination by the White House legal counsel. In effect, he was threatening to entangle me in a legal battle for voicing my concerns on Twitter that he does not possess expertise sufficient to assist the President of the United States with formulating and guiding national security policies. Gorka did not respond to an email requesting comment. I should point out, by the way, he is very frequently listed as not having responded to emails requesting comments, but he is a very active social media user and online services user. So I don't know how active he is with email, but he's constantly tweeting to critics and blocking people and all sorts of things. So he's online and he's aware and he's available for comment. He's just choosing not to respond to you when that happens. But I think the journalists, all the millions of journalists who are listening, have probably figured that out by now. Anyway, just one of the little interesting things about Gorka. Smith has been a regular contributor to think tank and TV discussions on terrorism, particularly the use of social media by Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State militant group. Last year, Foreign Policy magazine included him in its list of 100 leading global thinkers. I will bet that they did not include Sebastian Gorka on that list, or even maybe the next several hundred, probably. It's been a rough couple of months for Sebastian Gorka, I guess. But look how petulant he is here. And I love he's trying to. It's interesting that he makes sure to use his personal cell phone to insinuate that he is going to bring the White House legal counsel on to sue him for God knows what, for making these statements about Gorka. There's no way the White House counsel is going to involve themselves in anything like this. But of course, he's trying to intimidate somebody. And he has no idea, I don't know whether Smith had any idea initially, that was entirely outside of the bailiwick of the White House counsel. They are not going to be filing, although I guess that would be the case under normal circumstances. And again, everybody, our favorite hit, this is not normal. So I guess this White House counsel could do just about anything. But under normal circumstances, it would be a ridiculous threat. Smith, by the way, the article continues, has kept up a steady stream of jabs at Gorka since he learned that the Hungarian-born, wait a minute, we know he's not Hungarian-born, he's of Hungarian descent, but he's English-born. Well, okay, Hungarian something, British educated, and although, again, he was educated in Britain, but I question his education. We'll go with British educated terrorism specialist. No, that's not right either. 3 for 3 on this one. Hungarian-born British educated terrorism specialist. He's not Hungarian-born, he's barely educated, and he's not a terrorism specialist. But other than that, he's a guy who had been hired by President Donald Trump's top advisor, Steve Bannon. Both Bannon and Gorka came from the far-right Breitbart News, where Bannon was editor-in-chief and Gorka was national security editor. On his Twitter page, Gorka describes himself as a deputy assistant to the 45th President of America and an irregular warfare strategist. I don't think he's that either. His views on the global jihadist movement, as he calls it, align with a small cadre of right-wing observers who depict Islamist militants and extremists as being driven principally by passages from the Quran, rather than by government repression or sectarian, tribal, political, or economic factors. That's wrong, but it's the best explanation for their behavior that I've gotten to date, that they just, they think they must be being guided by the Quran, and they just find the most egregious passages of the Quran that they can. rather than by all the other factors that everyone normal believes drives terrorism. Although, who can say what really drives terrorism? On Tuesday, and again, we're back in February at this point, Smith tweeted that Gorka doesn't know the enemy's ideologies well enough to combat them. In an earlier, and it doesn't seem like he does he? In an earlier tweet directed at Trump, Smith wrote, "You are endangering the lives of Americans by hiring fake terrorism experts." Gorka earned his doctorate from he got a doctorate from a Hungarian university in 2008. And a few months later landed a faculty job at the College of International Security Affairs, a new Pentagon-funded school that was still working toward accreditation, the Washington Post reported. According to an online biography, he is also an associate fellow at the Joint Special Operations University at the U.S. Special Operations Command and holds the Major General Horner Distinguished Chair of Military Theory at the Marine Corps University Foundation, which was funded by Thomas Saunders III, a major Republican Party donor and a chairman of the Conservative Heritage Foundation. Interesting. Military theory. What in the world does he know about military theory? Anyway, the program's current director, James Howcroft, also a retired Marine colonel, told Politico that Gorka only periodically delivered lectures or served as a seminar leader. The White House advisor was clearly wounded by Smith's taunts. "Why is this vitriol popping out of you every day now?" He's got a sort of a stilted style, but okay. "Why is this vitriol popping out of you every day now?" Gorka asked Smith in his call. "I look at your Twitter feed once or twice a day, and it's half a dozen tweets about me, and I've never even met you." "Wow," Smith responded. "Are you defeating jihad by monitoring or trolling my Twitter feed?" Gorka expressed puzzlement several times that he was being attacked by someone who's never met me. "I've never met you, and I've never attacked you," he said to Smith, his voice rising in frustration and anger. Oh, I guess this is in the call. "And your Twitter feed is an incessant berating of my professional acumen. Put yourself in my shoes, Mr. Smith. Have you done that? How would you like it if someone you've never met daily and professionally attacked you?" "Happens all the time," Smith responded. "Generally speaking, academics and journalists laboring in the field of public policy expect to be criticized for their views." "It's not happened to me," Gorka said. "I can tell you." That I can tell you. Thank you. We use a sample from the president on that one. Just play it in the middle of your message. "I can tell you, maybe you can show me some trick on how to deal with it. This is the first time ever." It's the first time he's ever been criticized. Poor Sebastian. That is terrible. In fact, questions about Gorka's views and credentials to speak authoritatively on Islam and terrorism were severely criticized in lengthy feature articles in the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal in recent days. He also received a wave of unfavorable publicity in January of 2016 when he was arrested for trying to pass through a TSA checkpoint at Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C., carrying a loaded handgun. He was charged with a misdemeanor and sentenced to 6 months probation. One of his most influential critics is Cindy Storer. She also came up in our previous reading, right? A leading former CIA expert on the relationship between religious extremism and terrorism. He thinks the government and intelligence agencies don't know anything about radicalization, but the government knows a lot and thinks he's nuts, Storer was quoted as saying in the Post. Smith asked Gorka why he didn't telephone Storer, who calls you nuts in the Washington Post, to complain. Gorka responded that Storer's remark wasn't in a Twitter feed that is being sent to people on Capitol Hill. Boy, he's very social media focused. Okay, me too. Gorka's scholarship has also come under scrutiny by Mia Bloom, an expert on transcultural violence at Georgia State University. He doesn't understand a fraction of what he pretends to know about Islam, Bloom was quoted as saying by the Journal. Bloom has participated in TV appearances with Gorka and a panel last year at the Defense Intelligence Agency. I wonder if she says that to him there and then. That would be a little awkward, I think. Nor has Gorka, who does not speak Arabic and has never lived in a Muslim-majority nation, according to news accounts, submitted any of his articles for review in scholarly journals, says Lawrence P. Rubin, associate editor of Terrorism and Political Violence, the leading journal in that field. So he's looking for a little business there, I guess. Gorka has not submitted anything to the journal in the last 5 years or so, or in the last 5 or so years. Anyway, that has a slightly different meaning there. It's not like he used to submit things. It's just that in the last 5 years of which he's aware, he's seen nothing. According to my records, we have never used him as a reviewer. Rubin tells Newsweek, we would not have used him as a reviewer because he is not considered a terrorism expert by the academic or policy community. A government expert on Middle East radical movements, who asked not to be named for fear of being fired, tells Newsweek she was disturbed to hear Gorka suggest at a talk that he gave in Israel a few years ago that he knew of a specific person in the Obama White House who was deliberately misleading the government on terrorism issues. He said he wouldn't name the person on stage, but he would provide the particulars privately to anyone there who wanted to know, she said. Noting the audience was full of potential adversaries, she called Gorka's remark beyond the pale. Several times during his call with Smith, Gorka invited him to the White House to hash out their differences face to face, man to man, as he put it in one exchange. They set a tentative date for March 8th. But Smith warned Gorka that, in absolute fairness to you, what you will hear is that I have very serious concerns about our national security, and in particular Gorka's role as an advisor to the President of the United States. If you make a devastating case, then so be it, Gorka said. So be it? Smith answered. Sounds like a good call. We should have listened to it. So be it? Then what? You'll acknowledge that you're out of your league? Yeah, absolutely, Gorka said. Bring it on. Well, doesn't sound like he really was going to acknowledge it, but okay. Late Wednesday, though, Gorka withdrew his invitation. Oh my goodness, I'm so sad about that. I remembered I had the sound effect. Oh, well, he withdrew his invitation. Given your statements for the latest attack piece and continued disparaging tweets against not only myself but the administration and the president, Gorka wrote Smith, consider your invitation to meet withdrawn. That is so. He is really huffy about that. Okay. Well, I don't think he was. Well, he probably was holding his breath, getting ready to meet there and go to the White House and have it out, with the possibility, I guess, hanging out there that Gorka would strike his tent and move on if he had been defeated in debate over his qualifications and credentials. What a strange thing to do. All right. Well, I don't know. Maybe we have spent a little too much time on Sebastian Gorka, though I am a little bit intrigued with this other piece. And maybe on our way into the break, I'll just read a little bit to you, and I'll leave it for you in the summary. And it's something you can pick up and take a look at on your own time. The husband and wife team driving Trump's national security policy in Politico. This from also the same time period, I guess, February 23rd, just slightly before the last article. Before they became a Trump administration power couple, Sebastian and Catherine Gorka were prolific collaborators on research about the threat of Islamist terrorism. Except we wonder whether he was any good at it. Eli Stoeckles, Brian Bender, and Michael Crowley are byline on this piece. Before they moved into the Trump administration, then, apparently prolific collaborators on research about the Islamic terrorist threat, who built a fan base in far-right circles. Business partners as well as co-published authors, the Gorkas made successful careers out of their shared passion. Our pillow talk is the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda, Sebastian Gorka, now a senior White House aide, said during a talk in Florida last November, at which everybody apparently vomited and ran out of the room. What a jackass. At times, it can be even difficult to tell which Gorka is doing the talking, like if they're SK-Gorka. Several passages of Sebastian's 2007 dissertation on the rise of radical Islam appeared almost verbatim 2 years earlier in an article for the conservative journal Human Events. The byline over an online version of the article, C. Cornell, links to an author page for Catherine Cornell, the maiden name of Catherine Gorka. How odd. The dissertation, written for Sebastian's doctorate in political science from Corvinus University of Budapest, does not credit either a Catherine Cornell or a Catherine Gorka in the endnotes. "We write together all the time," Gorka said during an hour-long conversation with Politico. He brushed off the overlapping passages as probably something I dictated or that we came up with together. Yeah, okay, so he also gets credit for things that she wrote. How nice. That's a great marriage. Much of his writing, and that of his wife, he explained, is the result of a collaborative effort, even if that's not clear to readers. "She's my wife, and she's my closest collaborator," he said. In the decade since earning his doctorate, Sebastian has vaulted into the heart of the American national security apparatus at the White House. Gorka, who was born in Britain and became a U.S. citizen in 2012, is a deputy assistant to the president. He reports to strategist Steve Bannon and includes the Strategic Initiatives Group, Bannon's in-house think tank, in his email signature. That appointment, which includes a portfolio focusing on terrorism and national security, has befuddled mainstream counterterrorism experts who recognize Gorka from his Fox News appearances, but not as an influential thinker. "He is hardcore," said retired Army Colonel Joseph Collins, a professor at the National Defense University who worked with Sebastian Gorka when he taught there. "He came at the issue from the ideological route," which is not, of course, the same thing as the academic route. It's a little weird. There's much more, and I'm sure that there's much more to the sort of, let's say unusual relationship he maintains professionally with his wife. But let's move off of that and take our first break for Station ID. And we are back from our first break and ready to change directions for the rest of the show. I have something here, actually, that is a little bit more recent than the Sebastian Gorka stories that we have been reading to this point, though Gorka is, of course, back in the news. But this was it's an alarming headline that I passed by while watching my Twitter feed roll by, and saw the tweet of one Jesse Lerich. I'm not certain how it got to me. I never am, but Jesse Lerich, I am told via his Twitter bio, is the communications director at Organizing for America, OFA, of course, formerly Obama for America, and previous to that was a foreign policy spokesperson for Hillary Clinton, worked with American Bridge, etc., etc. But interesting take he had on this rather alarming NPR story. And he points out that North Carolina's bluest county had voting machine issues on Election Day. That machine vendor was also the target of Russian cyber attacks. And linking to an NPR story, that is rather alarming here. And he has a little screen grab from it, but it will be, no doubt, a screen grab from the NPR story. We'll read the body of that story and check into what's going on. It's interesting that in one of the closer states, the bluest county in the state had severe election day voting machine problems, and was among the vendor was among the firms targeted by Russian hackers. Pam Fessler is the writer of this story for NPR, and it was heard on All Things Considered. And since I never listened to NPR, for whatever reason, I never know whether these people are just writers or they are, in fact, reporters for NPR, who they credit for these stories. Russian cyber attack targeted elections vendor tied to voting day disruptions. The story is titled, "When people in several North Carolina precincts showed up to vote last November, weird things started to happen with the electronic systems used to check them in." That is, that's interesting all by itself. It's not the voting machines that had problems. It was the computers that they used to check people in to vote. Voters were going in and being told that they had already voted, and they hadn't, recalls Allison Riggs, an attorney with the Southern Coalition for Social Justice. The electronic systems, known as poll books, also indicated that some voters had to show identification, even though they did not. Investigators later discovered the company that provided those poll books had been the target of a Russian cyber attack. We were all worried about the possibility of Russians hacking the actual vote counting or the voting machines, but what about the poll books and other electronic systems that guarantee smooth, or supposed to guarantee smooth use of those voting machines by everyone who's eligible to use them? I don't know what kind of security there was on those. I mean, I assume there was some, but just wasn't where my eye was in all of this. So, they were the target of a Russian cyber attack. There's no evidence the two incidents are linked, but the episode has revealed serious gaps in U.S. efforts to secure elections. 9 months later, officials are still trying to sort out the details. And really, you would think if there really was serious cyber security with these poll books, there would be evidence either linking the incidents or definitively establishing that there was no linkage. But the fact that they still don't know what's going on 9 months later is a little worrisome, let's say. It all began shortly after polls opened at 6:30 a.m. on Election Day in Durham County. North Carolina was a key battleground state in a presidential race in which Russian interference was already a huge concern. Riggs was working as a nonpartisan voter hotline, at the time, and says the complaints poured in. Alarmed, she contacted election officials to find out what was going on. We had roughly 6 precincts call and report computer-related issues, says Durham County Elections Director Derek Bowens. He says the problem was confined to a few laptops that the county used to run the poll book software. When people came in to vote, poll workers used the system to confirm that they were properly registered and record that they've cast their ballots. At first, the county decided to switch to paper poll books, sounds like a good idea, in just those precincts to be safe. But Bowen says the State Board of Elections and Ethics Enforcement got involved and determined that it would be better to have uniformity across all of our 57 precincts, and we went with paper poll books across the county. That makes some sense. I could see that going exactly that way. That move, though, caused a whole new set of problems. Voting was delayed up to an hour and a half in a number of precincts as poll workers waited for new supplies. The paper poll books, with those, they had to cut out voters' names and attach them to a form before people could get their ballots. It's an old analog system, but you got to cut out the names and attach them to a form physically in order for them to get their ballots so they can vote. Precincts, though, they were expecting, of course, to do all this by computer, and then everybody got held up. And he said you got to wait for the paper poll books to arrive. Thankfully, they had them prepared and they could bring them over, but it was a delay in getting them there, and everybody had to sit there and wait. Who knows how many people had to give up and leave for all that. And then once they got there, having prepared to do all this electronically, precincts didn't have scissors. They didn't have tape. They didn't have glue sticks, says Riggs. As far as she was concerned, the solution was worse than the problem, and the state had overreacted. I mean, I think they made the right decision there for all of the procedures to be uniform across all of the county. But wow, they deliver all this stuff, the paper form of the poll books, great, going to paper instead of electronics, and then realize we don't have any of the stuff that makes this stuff work. We don't know how, we can't cut the names out. We can't attach them to forms. What are we going to do? But Susan Greenhall, who is part of an election security group called Verified Voting. I started out with Susan Greenhall. That's in reaction to Riggs saying that the solution was worse than the problem and the state had overreacted. But Susan Greenhall, who is part of an election security group called Verified Voting, worried that authorities underreacted. She was monitoring developments in Durham County when she saw a news report that the problem poll books were supplied by a Florida company named VR Systems. My stomach just dropped, says Greenhall. Earlier, She had seen news reports about the FBI having warned Florida election officials in September that Russians had tried to hack one of their vendors' computers. Greenhall also spoke with local elections officials a local election official who was on the call with the FBI. VR Systems was rumored to be that company. I became really concerned that this might be a cyber attack, some sort of cyber event, says Greenhall, but she had trouble getting anyone's attention. Greenhall says a contact she had at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security was concerned, but said there was little federal officials could do unless the state requested help. Obama administration officials who knew that Russians had already tried to tamper with election systems in a number of states had an elaborate plan in place to respond to any major election day disruptions or cyber attacks. Remember when we had a president who would prepare for possibilities like that and approach them responsibly, wouldn't panic anybody ahead of time, but was much more likely, let's say, 100% more likely to actually prepare for these eventualities just in case. Remember what that was like? That was awesome. Anyway, Anthony Ferrante, who was in charge of cyber incident response at the National Security Council at the time, says federal authorities were monitoring voting on November 8th from several command posts, including the one where he worked at the White House. Ferrante says Durham County's voting problems drew attention, and the federal government was ready to help, but only if the state asked. It was a delicate matter because U.S. elections are run by state and local governments, and there were already fears on the local level that the federal government might interfere in the name of security. And if you're an administration that's actually sensitive to that sort of thing, yeah, you would tread lightly, like the Obama administration. Imagine what's going to happen. It's a little bit of a tangent here, but imagine what's going to happen in situations like this when the situation is in the hands of the Trump administration. They're never going to be prepared for anything ahead of time, and they're not going to be worried about, people will think that we unlawfully interfered. They're just going to go and do what they want to do. And in addition to which, they're probably actually plotting to interfere and looking to cover their tracks along the way. Never mind the old problem of an administration that's actually not trying to interfere, but trying to make sure that it does everything fairly and opting not to step in with needed assistance for fear that they will be accused of having too heavy a hand. We'll never have, I don't know, will we ever have an administration that conscientious again? I wonder if sometimes if Trump has destroyed our ability to appreciate that. Hopefully not yet. Anyway, where were we with this? Yes, so the states were already sensitive that the federal government might interfere in the name of security. States were very adamant about declaring their independence from the federal government with respect to the 2016 election. And of course, we respected that, says Ferrante. However, we wanted to make sure we were prepared and assets were available in the event that states did call us for assistance. How sensible. North Carolina didn't call for aid. Instead, officials assured federal authorities that things were under control and that they had switched to the paper poll books. And that was a good call, I think. The problem was, on Election Day, the state was operating with limited information. It was aware that Russian hackers had tried to break into VR systems, which provided the poll books for 21 North Carolina counties. A leaked top-secret National Security Agency report suggested the Russian cyber attack took place in August of 2016. It didn't become public until June of this year, 2017, and state officials were never told about it. We found out like everybody else did, says Josh Lawson, General Counsel for the State Board of Elections. Lawson says the state first learned of the hack attempt when The Intercept, an online news site, published its story detailing Russian attempts to hack VR systems. The leaked report said hackers then sent emails to local election offices that appeared to come from VR, but which actually contained malicious software. Lawson says there is no evidence that anyone in North Carolina received those fake emails, but he adds it's our job to be paranoid about this, and probably a good idea. When you have a leaked memorandum indicating that there may have been a vulnerability about which you were not aware at the time, you're going to want to try to confirm that there was no actual interference. So now, months after the election, the state has launched an investigation into what happened in Durham County. It has secured the poll books that displayed the inaccurate information so forensic teams can examine them. For his part, County Elections Director Bowens says voters should feel confident that the election was secure and that no vote counts were affected. The county conducted its own investigation in November and determined that VR Systems software had not failed. Some poll books had not been updated with the latest software, so they were displaying outdated voter information, which is, by the way, just to pause, I mean, is that not infuriating in its own right? I mean, the whole point of having it be electronic is that, one, it would be easier to use, and two, it could be up to the minute. It could be updated along the way all the time. How could you not have updated your information? I mean, that by itself is such an egregious dereliction of duty that somebody really ought to be facing some prosecution over that. How could you be a county election administrator and send out poll books that haven't been updated on November 7th? That's nuts. But there's no treatment of that in here. So that's lacking. I'm a little furious with that. The conclusion, it says, was that it was administrative errors that caused the issues on Election Day, says Bowens. And again, somebody needs to be, brought to court and answering for that. Administrative errors? Well, where are the administrators? Let's ask them some questions. Let's find out what's going on. Let's make them answer in front of people who were denied ballots. I would like to see that. Thank you very much. And I'm not even from North Carolina. That may very well turn out to be the case, but the episode has left all parties frustrated, plus me, and I'm just reading the story about it. VR Systems says that it agrees with the county's findings and that the problem was due to human error. Ben Martin, the company's chief operating officer, notes that no other county in the state had problems with VR Systems poll books on election day. He also says the company warned its customers to be on the lookout for fake emails when it became aware of them right before the election. Thanks a bunch. I don't know what else they can do. They're the victims of hacking here, but still. It's not clear how widely that information was shared. That should have been, of course, broadcast 24/7, but I guess not. Martin also insists that the hackers were unable to break into the company's computers, even though the leaked NSA intelligence report concludes that it's likely they did. Of course, they're going to say that they didn't, but okay. Attorney Allison Riggs warned that the decision to use paper poll books caused the kind of chaos at the polls that many analysts worry is the real motive behind Russia's hacking attempts. Riggs was able to get a court order to extend voting hours in the problem precincts, but is worried about officials' future responses to what might just be a minor technical glitch. I mean, I think I disagree with her about the overreaction assessment, but I see where she's coming from. But yeah, I mean, really, honestly, the only issue I can think of is, okay, well, when the counties ship out paper polling books, please make sure to send scissors and tape and glue. I mean, I don't know how many years it's been since they did it all by paper, but anyway, she also has a very good point in that Russia's hacking attempts might just as well be attempts at creating chaos. I never successfully broke into the computer, but if I messed up the poll books and caused an hour and a half delay in getting people paper poll books, and then some of those people were unable to successfully handle paper poll books for even longer, then mission accomplished. I created some chaos. And we need to think about the hacking that way too, even if there's no evidence that anybody got into the computers. Anyway, she continues on. She says, you want to be absolutely safe, you want to be safe absolutely, she says, but you also want to have a measured, appropriate response that doesn't exacerbate the chaos or effect of whatever may be the problem. Well, sure, you want to. But I don't know. See, to me, it's still a matter of, well, okay, when you send out the paper poll books, you send out all the supplies, and then you don't have a problem. Anyway, state election officials say they would be much better prepared to respond if they had more reliable information. Lawson says federal intelligence officials have still not confirmed to the state that Russians tried to hack into VR Systems computers or whether North Carolina is one of the 21 states that federal officials have publicly revealed were targeted for attack last year. Matt Masterson, who chairs the U.S. Elections Assistance Commission, which is having its budget slashed by Republicans, of course, understands why everyone is frustrated. That's good. At least you understand me. As information has come out on various media reports, election officials, I think fairly, have said, why are we reading about this? Why has no one shared this information with us? Or I guess why are we reading about it in the newspaper anyway? Moving forward, that can't be the case. The elections officials need to be in the know, need to be receiving this information. Earlier this year, the Department of Homeland Security declared elections part of the nation's critical infrastructure. Masterson says state and federal authorities are meeting to try to figure out exactly what this means in practical terms and how they'll work together, sharing intelligence and other information. Masterson says the goal is to reach some agreement soon because everyone expects the Russian hackers will be back. And I think we all expect that too. Well, let's switch gears for just a moment and go to one of our favorite subjects. How big and bold a liar Donald Trump and all of his businesses and everyone who works for him really is. Let's grab this story by David Farenthold and Lori Rosa here, who noticed the reporting of the Palm Beach Post on this subject and picked it up and spun it into a more comprehensive narrative. But check this out. It's the article is from, let's see, is it even dated? August 7th. Here we are. Apply by fax. Before it can hire foreign workers, Trump's Mar-a-Lago club advertises at home, briefly, and you'll find out why. And the article reads this way. President Trump's Mar-a-Lago club needs to hire 35 waiters for this winter's social season in Palm Beach, Florida. Last month, the club placed an ad on page C8 of the Palm Beach Post, crammed full of tiny print laying out the job experience requirements in classified ad shorthand. 3 months MOS, 3 months recent and verifiable experience in fine dining / country club, the ad said. No tips, by the way, and also ads under, because the people who join Mar-a-Lago don't have spare cash to give out to people who wait on them, you see. The ad gave no email address or phone number. Apply by fax, it said. The ad also provided a mailing address. It ran twice, then never again. This was an underwhelming way to attract local job seekers, but that wasn't the point. The ads were actually part of Mar-a-Lago's efforts to hire foreign workers for those 35 jobs. Why? Because foreign workers have fax machines? No. About a week before the ads ran, the President's Club asked the Labor Department for permission to hire 70 temporary workers from overseas, government records show. Besides the 35 waiters, it asked for 20 cooks and 15 housekeepers, slightly more than it hired last year. Of course, I believe the original news that they were filing for that permission from the Labor Department, and gee whiz, I'm not even sure. Do you think they'll get it? I don't know. Does he know the Labor Department? Does he know the Secretary? He probably has a pretty good relationship, right? But that news came out, I think, during their Made in America week, which was a huge joke, except that, you know, Donald Trump doesn't really care about any of that stuff ever, much less in Made in America week. Anyway, so why the advertisements and why the tiny print and why apply by fax? To get visas for the foreign workers that they really want, Mar-a-Lago, like any other business that relies on temporary employees each year, must first take legally mandated steps to look for U.S. workers. You can't just hire from outside the United States without first looking for U.S. workers. That's a sensible law. But I guess it's not very strict, because the requirements include placing 2 ads in a newspaper. So they did. You can tell they're doing the absolute bare minimum necessary to comply with the law here. Typically, this attempt to recruit U.S. workers is a ritualized failure. Its outcome is usually a conclusion that there are no qualified Americans to hire, justifying the need for government to issue the visas. In the past few days, that ritual began again at Mar-a-Lago, Trump's members-only club that opens every winter and has become a frequent destination for the president. The club's request for visas stood out because it came in the middle of Made in America week at the White House, as Trump and his administration sought to highlight his push to remake U.S. trade policy. Even as Trump urged other U.S. businesses to hire American, his businesses were gathering evidence to prove that it couldn't. Officials at Mar-a-Lago and the Trump organizations did not respond to requests for questions for this article. Neither did a White House spokeswoman. I wonder which White House spokeswoman did not do it all this time. During the 2016 presidential campaign, Trump defended his practice of using foreign workers at his club, even as he blamed immigrants for taking American jobs and keeping wages low for native-born workers. It's very, very hard to get people. It's very, very hard, you see. But other hotels do exactly the same thing. This is a procedure. It's part of the law, he said during a Republican candidates debate in March of 2016 after Senator Marco Rubio of Florida criticized him for using foreigners at Mar-a-Lago. I take advantage of that. There's nothing wrong with it. We have no choice. I mean, look at the way he's framing this thing. We have no choice. The whole thing is based on, well, you just can't get an American cook or waiter. Now, where I go, America is full of American cooks and American waiters. Almost everywhere I go, the people working at restaurants are Americans. But it can't be done at Mar-a-Lago. It's too exclusive. We can't. Regular Americans are afraid to approach me, and they're afraid to approach Mar-a-Lago and seek jobs. I mean, the whole thing's rigged, right? The category of visas requested at Mar-a-Lago is called the H-2B, and the visas are intended for workers doing temporary jobs in non-agricultural fields. The number is theoretically limited to 66,000 per year, although that cap is frequently lifted. This year, for instance, the Trump administration added 15,000 visas after employers complained that they couldn't get the workers they need. The visas are common across the hospitality industry, including at other resorts in Palm Beach, where an influx of visitors for only a few months each year means businesses must find workers willing to take temporary and often labor-intensive jobs. Yucheng Wang, a professor at the University of Central Florida's Rosen College of Hospitality Management, said Florida's tourism industry is utterly dependent on these workers. This is not an easy industry to work in, Wang said. The jobs are typically long hours with relatively low pay. It's seasonal and temporary, so there's instability in that workforce. If you want to enjoy a balance between work and life, this is not that kind of industry. Mar-a-Lago has relied on foreign workers since at least 2008, according to government documents. To recruit them, it relies on Petrina Group International, a firm with offices in Ithaca, New York, and Romania. News reports have said that Mar-a-Lago's workers have largely been from Romania and Haiti. Representatives for Petrina did not respond to requests for comment. In the past, Trump's club has followed the same pattern of searching for and not hiring American workers. 2 years ago, for instance, Jeannie Coleman, who lives in nearby West Palm Beach, applied for a job as a housekeeper. Mar-a-Lago called back. She had an interview and then nothing. I was very disappointed. At that time, I really needed a job, said Coleman, now 50, who works at a clothing store. I had the qualifications. The interview went great, but they never did even the common courtesy of calling me back and telling me why I wasn't hired. The Labor Department says employers seeking foreign workers must hire an American applicant if qualified and available. That year, Mar-a-Lago told the government it needed to hire 20 foreign workers as housekeepers. The government gave permission. Now, Trump has resigned from leadership positions at Mar-a-Lago and other Trump Organization's businesses, but he still owns them, and he has treated Mar-a-Lago as a second home. Last season, he spent 7 weekends there, calling his club the Winter White House. In determining Mar-a-Lago's visa applications, Labor Department spokesman Egan Reich said the president's business would be treated like any other. The Labor Department does not give preference or special treatment to any business or individual, he said. To immigration critics who have welcomed Trump's calls for tightened border restrictions, Mar-a-Lago presents a missed opportunity for the president to lead by example. Yeah, right. Let wages go up. Offer better benefits, more vacation time, better working conditions, said Stephen Camarata of the Center for Immigration Studies, which advocates for lower immigration levels. We don't have a shortage of this kind of worker. You just got to look harder. And I would encourage the president or whoever makes the hiring decisions down there at Mar-a-Lago to do that. So far, there is no sign that anything has changed. Mar-a-Lago has done what is legally required to seek U.S. job applicants, including posting 2 newspaper ads on non-consecutive days for each of the openings. It also posted the position with a local job placement agency. At least 2 people applied, according to records kept by the state workforce agency. One was Oster Lociel, who looking for a job as a cook. He has 10 years of experience. He didn't realize that Mar-a-Lago was the president's club. On the phone, he said the Mar-a-Lago people didn't mention it. I've been cooking at a country club most of my life, so I was interested, he said. But after learning more about the job, he turned Mar-a-Lago down. Well, I'm looking for full-time work, not seasonal, he said. By law, Mar-a-Lago needed to search for American workers for 14 days before it could move to the next step in the process of seeking visas for foreign workers. That step is to send documentation to the Labor Department office attesting to its inability to hire Americans. Well, they really went all out on that one, didn't they? We'll go into our break shortly and be back on the other side of it and bring you more about the horrific habits of well-known liar and complete idiot Donald Trump. Right back after this. We are back from our break, and we'll have to manually turn the instrumental accompaniment down here. Thank you very much for hanging on with us to the other side of the program. And now top of the hour, and ready to roll on a couple of stories. I have a backlog of data points to enter in the web of information we are building about the Trump-Russia story. There are definitely a few things that we have let fall by the wayside in the rapidly escalating storylines, all kinds of Trump storylines. Let me get to this one here. This one's more generalized, but I think we're going to need it in order to connect Russian interference to a number of other Republican campaigns as well. The Dallas Morning News has this piece in their dallasnews.com website from August 3rd. Ruth May, the contributor who is the writer of the piece here, GOP campaigns took $7.35 million from oligarch linked to Russia. I was wondering about how this sort of thing is happening so often. Of course, coordinated interference would explain some of it, but it's very interesting. Like, I thought these foreign contributions were simply banned, but I realized, I haven't read through the story yet, but I realized that one of the big problems we're encountering is people who are now American citizens who left the former Soviet Union or the actual Soviet Union when it was still Soviet Union and have become naturalized citizens since. The lobbyist who accompanied Natalia Veselnitskaya to her Trump Tower meeting was the last example we saw of that. Let's just take a look here. Party loyalty, Ruth May writes, is often cited as the reason that GOP leaders have not been more outspoken in their criticism of President Donald Trump and his refusal to condemn Russia's interference in the 2016 presidential election. Yet there may be another reason that top Republicans have not been more vocal in their condemnation. Perhaps it's because they have their own links to the Russian oligarchy that they would prefer go unnoticed. Donald Trump and the political action committees for Mitch McConnell, Marco Rubio, Scott Walker, Lindsey Graham, John Kasich, and John McCain accepted $7.35 million in contributions from a Ukrainian-born oligarch who is the business partner of 2 of Russian President Vladimir Putin's favorite oligarchs and a Russian government bank. During the 2015 and 2016 election season, Ukrainian-born billionaire Len Blavatnik contributed $6.35 million to leading Republican candidates and incumbent senators. Mitch McConnell was the top recipient of Blavatnik's donations, collecting $2.5 million for his GOP Senate Leadership Fund under the names of 2 of Blavatnik's holding companies. Access Industries and AI Altep Holdings. according to the Federal Election Commission documents at opensecrets.org. How interesting. Of course, it was McConnell who fought so very hard to prevent the Obama administration from doing any of the law enforcement and counterintelligence work necessary to expose, combat, and hopefully stop the Russian interference during the election season. You'll probably recall that he threatened to make it an explicitly political issue as opposed to a counterintelligence issue should the Obama administration reveal that this was going on. Very interesting in light of this information. It was always interesting, but now it's just a little more so. Marco Rubio's Conservative Solutions PAC and his Florida First project received $1.5 million through Blavatnik's two holding companies. Other high-dollar recipients of funding from Blavatnik were PACs representing Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker at $1.1 million. What a waste of money that was. Holy mackerel. South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham at $800,000. Ohio Governor John Kasich at $250,000 and Arizona Senator John McCain at $200K. In January, courts reported that Blavatnik donated another $1 million to Trump's inaugural committee. Ironically, the shared address of Blavatnik's companies is directly across the street from Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue in New York. I don't know whether we've called this guy's name before or not. It rings a bell, but they're all beginning to ring bells at some point. I do think we may have mentioned him. Maybe we saw that January Courts article. I don't recall offhand. But let's plow forward. Len Blavatnik, considered to be one of the richest men in Great Britain, there we are, holds dual citizenship in the U.S. and the U.K. That solves some of our issues here. He is known for his business savvy and generous philanthropy, but not without controversy. In 2010, Oxford University drew intense criticism for accepting a donation of £75 million from Blavatnik for a new school of government bearing his name. Isn't that interesting? I mean, it's nice if there's no strings attached, but wouldn't it be interesting if students in the UK learned about government and how it works from the perspective of an international and dual citizenship, Ukrainian-born, Russian-favoring oligarch? That would be difficult to undo were that to be the case. I don't know how much influence he has on the way government is taught there. It's just an interesting thought for the moment. Faculty, alumni, and international human rights activists claimed the university was selling its reputation and prestige to Putin's associates. And I guess they are. Blavatnik's relationships with Russian oligarchs close to Putin, particularly Oleg Deripaska, should be worrisome for Trump and the 6 GOP leaders who took Blavatnik's money during the 2016 presidential campaign. Lucky for them, no one has noticed yet. I guess we're noticing now. Oleg Deripaska is the founder and majority owner of Rusal, the world's second largest aluminum company based in Russia. Rusal, Russian aluminum. Len Blavatnik owns a significant stake in Rusal and served on its board until November 10th, 2016, 2 days after Donald Trump was elected. Is that relevant? I don't know. Deripaska controls Rusal with a 48% majority stake through his holding company, EN Plus Group, and the Russian government owns a 4.35% stake of EN Group through its second largest state-owned bank, VTB. VTB was exposed in the Panama Papers in 2016 for facilitating the flow of billions of dollars to offshore companies linked to Vladimir Putin and is under sanctions by the U.S. government. Deripaska has been closely connected to the Kremlin since he married into Boris Yeltsin's family in 2001, which literally includes him in the Russian clan known as the Family. According to the Associated Press, starting in 2006, Deripaska made annual payments of $10 million to Paul Manafort through the Bank of Cyprus to advance Putin's global agenda. I guess we're getting closer here. Len Blavatnik's co-owner in Rusal is his longtime business partner, Viktor Vekselberg. another Russian oligarch with close ties to Putin. And there are very few Russian oligarchs that really don't have close ties with Putin. That's kind of part and parcel of being an oligarch, a live oligarch anyway. Blavatnik and Vekselberg, hold their 15.8% joint stake in Rusal in the name of Sual Partners, their offshore company in the Bahamas. Vekselberg also happens to be the largest shareholder in the Bank of Cyprus. Another oligarch with close ties to Putin, Dmitry Rybolovev, we know we've spoken of him before, owns a 3.3% stake in the Bank of Cyprus. Rybolovlev is known as Russia's fertilizer king. He's the one that keeps flying in and out of the same airports as Donald Trump, I think, and has been in the spotlight for several months as the purchaser of Trump's 60,000-foot square foot mansion in Palm Beach. That was the big one that they tore down, that he bought for like $95 million, way over market price, and then tore it down. Rybolovlev bought the estate for $54 million more than Trump paid for the property at the bottom of the crash in the U.S. real estate market. The convoluted web that links Putin's oligarchs to Trump's political associates and top Republicans is difficult to take in. I'm glad you said so, Ruth, because I agree. Trump and Putin have a common approach to governance. They rely heavily on long-term relationships and family ties. While there have been tensions between Putin and Deripaska over the years, the Kremlin came to Deripaska's rescue in 2009 when he was on the verge of bankruptcy by providing a $4.5 billion emergency loan through state-owned Vnesheconombank. We've definitely had to say that before. That's VEB for short, where Putin is chair of the advisory board. VEB, known as President Putin's pet bank, is now in crisis after sanctions applied by Europe and the U.S. in 2014 have isolated it from the international banks that were the sources of its nearly $4 billion in hard currency loans that, according to Bloomberg, mature this year and in 2018. Also good to know, I think. Russia's international currency reserves are near a 10-year low, which has put further pressure on the president of VEB, Sergei Gorkov, to find sources of international rescue capital. Notably, it was Gorkov who met secretly with Jared Kushner in December at Trump Tower. Kushner's failure to report the meeting with Gorkov has drawn the attention of the Senate Intelligence Committee that now wants to question Kushner about the meeting. All right, well, that's actually the end of the article as it was originally run, and then we have the credits. Ruth May is a global business professor at the University of Dallas and wrote this column for the Dallas Morning News. But there's a correction down at the bottom. Let's see what that's about. August 7th, the headline on an earlier version of this column incorrectly said Blavatnik is Russian. He was born in Ukraine during the Soviet era. I see. An earlier version of this column also used the name Leonid Len Blavatnik. He has changed his first name to Leonard officially. And the column has also been updated to remove language describing the online presentation of a press release about Blavatnik resigning from the Rusal board because it lacked context. Well, okay. Super important revision there. I don't know. I'll read them all there. They took the time to print them. I'll read them. So, a couple of very interesting data points there, I think well worth adding to the web, and there's more than that. This one from Grant Stern, who is a Miami-based columnist and radio broadcaster and professional mortgage broker. That's his own description of what he does, and it's posted at his blog, thesternfacts.com, and I don't know whether we have read from his blog before or not, but I just want to kind of throw that flag out there because I'm not certain about it. It's very difficult these days, and you got to approach these things with an abundance of caution. I'm not certain about the veracity, and I don't know whether I've strayed into the sympathetic anti-Trump territory, but I want to be careful not to wander too far into Louise Mensch territory. I don't know. But Grant Stern alleges this piece. We'll put it out there with that grain of salt. Trump Jr. now tied to banker behind Russian money laundering scheme. That is not hard to believe, so I'm okay with pushing forward here. Let's take a look at this. Donald Trump Jr. has a direct personal connection to the central figure in multiple money laundering cases involving Russia, Latvia, Ukraine, UK, Seychelles Islands, New Zealand, Vanuatu, Kyrgyzstan, Mexico, and the United States. Wow. Donald Trump Jr. gave a paid speech to Baltic International Bank's annual conference in 2012, and now he's blocking people on Twitter who discuss the trip and his meetings in Riga with its founder, the controversial Latvian banker and former British Football Club executive, Valeris Belokons, a.k.a. Valeri, there we are, thank you, Valeri Belokon, Belokon. We'll go with Valeri Belokon, that's a little easier to pronounce. Baltic International Bank has branches in Moscow, Latvia, Ukraine, and London. Trump Jr.'s hyperactive Twitter blocking led me to dig deeper into his contact at Baltic International Bank. And when the Democratic Coalition's senior advisor, Scott Dworkin, no relation, I believe, to Greg, and a little bit of a hint of where this is coming from. I would say Dworkin occupies space somewhere in between, not Louise Mensch. I think he's doing a better job than Louise Mensch, but there's a couple of other, I guess I put him in the middle ground between, I definitely take his work with a grain of salt, but not nearly as big or as many grains as Mensch or some other operators in that space. But so I have my worries about this, but I do think it's worth putting it on the record. When Democratic Coalition senior advisor Scott Dworkin found a series of Trump leaks photos of Trump Jr. on the bank's website, we both believed there was more to the story. He said, Don Jr. is looking for an easy out. He met me one-on-one with the head, he met one-on-one, not with him, but with the head of the bank that was actively running a scam to launder money for Mexican drug lords. When confronted with hard evidence, he didn't deny or clarify. He ran away and hid like a coward. Not certain what that actually means from Don Trump Jr., but it's there. It turns out that Baltic International Bank has been named a Mexican cartel money laundering agent, is subject to a criminal inquiry in another former Soviet state, Kyrgyzstan, plus Valery Belokon's partners in Blackpool FC, that's the football club, accused the banker of pumping dirty cash into their one-time British Premier League football club. I suppose that is why Donald Trump Jr. blocked me on Twitter as well after writing this story about his meeting with said Latvian banker. There's a link to another piece about it. Belokon's Baltic International Bank wrote a money laundering manual and got caught last year and fined because of the OOCRP's reporting. Just like the Mediterranean island of Cyprus, who shares a religion with Russia, and where Democratic congressional investigators visited investigating Trump-related money laundering, Latvia's cultural and language ties have enabled it, too, to become a EU hotspot for Russian money laundering. Even Deutsche Bank, recently cited in the $10 billion mirror trading money laundering scam, has cut off most Latvian banks from dollar-based transactions as foreign cash pours into the tiny nation. BIB even posted new photos to congratulate Donald Trump on winning America's presidency on November 9th, 2016. And they show Trump Jr. meeting with Belokon one-on-one. The Trump Organization made Latvian headlines in 2011 when it entered into discussions about funding a major concert hall. Then Latvian media reported in 2012 that Trump Jr. was mainly interested in building a concert hall venue in Riga. After last year's election, a Latvian news website wrote a follow-up story, which the source of the cover image is the source of the cover image for this story, showing a meeting between the two men. Trump Jr. and Bellicon looking rather pleased in a posed action photo, as well as the two images below. You'll have to see them meeting, conferring, shaking hands. Nothing special, but it's there. Latvian media made no mention of this meeting, nor did a subsequent video where Trump Jr. claims to have lots of Russian business ties, which has still somehow evaded numerous media reports about the family's business. EXIF, whatever that means, data from the above photos, so metadata, I guess, dates the images from the same time as Trump Jr.'s public speech in 2012 to the Latvian bank conference. Trump Jr. himself said it was mostly a networking opportunity and never publicly mentioned meeting the owner of the bank. He even met with the concert hall project promoters again, making local headlines, but it would be the final media mention of the Trump organization's interest in the project. Trump Jr., it says here, has good reason to fear being associated with Bellicon and BIB. Bellicon's Baltic International Bank was also caught laundering $860 million in Mexican cartel money in 2011 from a company named Tormex, a phantom company in New Zealand, into the now-defunct U.S. bank Wachovia. The money laundering scam reached from Mexico to Latvia, through Russia, and to the remote Seychelles Islands and Vanuatu in the South Pacific to New Zealand. Ukrainian companies were used to generate fake invoices and contracts. In the end, Wachovia was caught handling over $350 billion, dollars, that's what it says, in Mexican cash transactions, this according to The Guardian, according to this link here, transactions without money laundering controls by the Federal Drug Enforcement Agency before failing and being acquired by Wells Fargo. Australia's financial intelligence agency, Austrac, published a complete case study with the succinct diagram shown here at left. You'll have to take a look at it yourself, explaining exactly how Sinaloa cartel money found its way to Latvia. Wow. Notably, the Latvian bank's ties to Mexican drug cartels were publicly established before Trump Jr. met with Valery Bellicon at Baltic International Bank the following year. Bellicon's British football dealings sunk by former Soviet state money laundering problems, reads the header of the next section. Valery Bellicon is also involved in a series of high-stakes lawsuits over British football club Blackpool FC. Bellicon's Latvian bank was involved with another bank he set up in the former Soviet state of Kyrgyzstan. The two issues have become linked as Bellicon's British partners accused the Latvian of pumping laundered money into Blackpool FC's books after buying a minority stake in the club and spending big bucks on player acquisitions. Blackpool FC formally suspended Valery Bellicon this March after a Paris court found that his Latvian bank and his Kyrgyzstani Manas bank were both involved in large-scale money laundering, an accusation which he, of course, denies. The Paris court overturned a lower court ruling against Kyrgyzstan, which called their shutdown and seizure of Manas Bank an illegal taking in light of the new evidence of money laundering practices from Latvian bank regulators. The court also found that Bellicon's Manas Bank engaged in a greater volume of transactions than that of the entire GDP for the country of Kyrgyzstan. The court, it says here, gave weight to the data from the experts' reports regarding the amount of transactions that Manas Bank operated. The Cour d'appel, the appellate court, I guess in French, noted that it had considerably exceeded the GDP of Kyrgyzstan in 2008, which could not be explained by the ordinary banking practices in a country with such poor economic conditions as the Kyrgyz Republic. I'm sure I have the pronunciation of the country wrong as well. Just last month, Kyrgyzstan hit Bellicon with a criminal 20-year money laundering sentence after a trial in absentia last month. However, because of the lack of due process, the verdict isn't enforceable in European jurisdictions. After Bellicon's big cash investments into Blackpool's soccer team in 2010 and management as club president, the small-town soccer club made an astronomical rise to enter the British Premier League, the world's most watched football league, which led to a windfall of television money. Bellicon wound up suing his partners for unfair practices by refusing to pay him profit sharing based on his return on investment for elevating the club out of the third-rate league and for making loans to the club. Bellicon won a cash verdict in the first major case earlier this year. Blackpool FC has fallen all the way to British football's 4th division today. Meanwhile, there's a second civil case against Blackpool FC's owners by Bellicon that is being tried in London right now in what's being called one of the most expensive cases in British football history. If the money laundering Latvian bank hadn't celebrated Donald Trump's improbable election, we might never have known his son met with a money laundering banker for cartels and Russians so daring that he marched openly into the world of international sport and started spreading cash everywhere. I first reported Trump Jr.'s trip to Latvia last October based on the Democratic Coalition's research, but then only for its significance about his video confession to lots of Russian business ties when his father denied having Russian business ties. We know that was a big fat lie. This quote included here, Trump Jr.'s ties are President Trump's ties, since the younger is merely an agent of the Trump Organization family business, which is wholly owned by Donald Trump Sr. If Donald Trump Jr. hadn't blocked myself, he writes, and Scott Dworkin, we might have never known to follow up on the post-election blog posts about this meeting. Blocking people on Twitter for asking questions isn't leadership, Dworkin told me in disgust about the president and his son's new penchant for running away from problems. It's un-American. I don't know if it's necessarily un-American, but in this case, probably not a particularly smart tactic if it tips off investigators. I wouldn't say it was entirely un-American, but okay. Well, very interesting. I am not 100% sure how much weight to put behind a report like this, but there are a number of linked articles here to sources that I consider to be, easier to understand the reputation of, certainly, and perhaps we ought to check some of those out. For right now, though, I don't know. I don't know how much I buy this. I'm going to have to spend some time checking out Grant Stern and, where I want to categorize him. If any of you are familiar with him and have any comments on it, please, by all means, let me know. Email, messages on Daily Kos, tweet me at KagroX on Twitter, KagroX@gmail.com if you want to chime in by email. I'm just not sure, but it has a feel like it may be a little bit fabulous. I'm not sure. I don't want to accuse him of anything here. But I don't know. I wasn't satisfied with the way he laid things out there. Sometimes you take a shot at these things and you get a dud, and I kind of have to be willing to admit when that happens. Of course, this is pre-taped. I could have taped over it, but I'm going to keep it on the record and see what you guys think. Anyway. We have that, and, we'll check out a couple of these links just to see if we can bolster that story a little bit more. Plus, we have at least one more piece that we've just missed to date. It doesn't have anything to do with Trump-Russia, but it does have to do with Trump and a domestic situation, which didn't get enough attention at the time. We just didn't know enough about what was going on at the time. But we'll give you a teaser, and then, of course, it'll be time for us to duck out for one last station identification break shortly. This one referred to me by Kate Sherrill, a piece in the Daily Beast dated August 2nd. Trump's DHS, Department of Homeland Security, ordered agents to block congressmen during the travel ban. Do you remember when, during the travel ban, members of Congress, including I see here pictured Senator Cory Booker, showed up at the airports, presumably here Dulles International Airport, and demanded to see the immigration officials and Department of Homeland Security officials to discuss the implementation of this ban with them, and he was initially blocked from entry into the areas where they were holding the detainees. And it turns out this was done apparently on orders from the Trump administration straight to the DHS. We'll have to check into that after this break. Let's play our way out of it, bring our music back in, and say we'll see you again on the other side of this break and catch up then. All right, thank you for waiting with us through that last station break. We should have a clear shot to the end of the show at this point, and we've got a lot to catch up on, of course. Let's bring up this article that Kate Sherrill sent us regarding the DHS orders to block congressmen during the travel ban. Let's see here. The first hours of the travel ban. In the first hours of the travel ban, Trump administration officials stiff-armed Congress, treated lawyers' calls like protests, and shared photos among themselves of protesters. Betsy Woodruff, the writer of this piece. On the chaotic day the Trump administration's travel ban went into effect, high-level Homeland Security officials directed their staff at airports around the country to stiff-arm members of Congress and treat lawyers with deep suspicion. Members of Congress say they're shocked by the orders uncovered in documents obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request from the Daily Beast and the James Madison Project, both of which were represented by the law offices of Mark S. Zaid. I am extremely troubled that CPB, that's Customs and Border Protection employees, would be instructed by superiors to ignore congressional representatives trying to do their job, especially under such circumstances, said Senator Cory Booker. We suspected as much at the time, but it's jarring to see it in black and white. I'll be asking for more information from CBP on this matter. A CBP official wrote in an email on January 28th that the agency's employees were forbidden from speaking to members of Congress. As stated on the call earlier today, you and your staff are not to engage with the media or congressional representatives at this time, emailed Todd Owen, the Executive Assistant Commissioner of CBP's Office of Field Operations at 7:49 p.m. on Saturday, January 28th. Please make sure your subordinate port directors are following this direction. Please report any such requests to acting AC, and is here redacted, from Congressional Affairs. Thank you. Owen sent that email about 20 hours after the travel ban went into effect. The ban had already thrown airports around the country into chaos. Protesters flooded into airports by the thousands, waving signs and singing patriotic songs. Lawyers hauled laptops and printers into international baggage claim areas, trying to keep detained travelers from being deported or from accidentally signing away their green cards. And members of Congress held impromptu press conferences and demanded CBP officials tell them how many people were being detained. CBP would not tell them. The directives to disengage with congressmen, block their oversight, is huge, and yet another example of an assault on separation of powers in our democracy, said Hassan Ahmad, an immigration lawyer who protested at Dulles Airport. Jennifer Gabris, a spokeswoman for Customs and Border Protection, said this was normal. As part of CBP policy, all congressional inquiries are coordinated through CBP's Office of Congressional Affairs, or OCA. She said in an email, OCA serves as the single point of contact within CBP for all communications between CBP and Congress. OCA is committed to addressing any question or concern members of Congress or their staffs may have related to CBP's complex mission. From Dulles to San Francisco, America's international airports got extremely noisy, but there was a glaring silence through it all from CBP, which staunchly refused to answer questions from journalists and members of Congress. These newly obtained emails explain why that is, because senior agency officials were caught off guard just as badly as those travelers and had to scramble to figure out how to implement the ban. Another email sent by a CBP official whose name was redacted shows that the agency made a deliberate choice to ignore questions from attorneys. Please be aware that various locations around the country have begun receiving a high volume of calls from various individuals and others claiming to be attorneys regarding the recent executive order. Read the email and sent out on February 1st just after 3 p.m. The callers appear to be reading from a script, and they begin by identifying themselves, state they are calling regarding the EO, and proceed to ask if we are following the law, the EO, and ask how many people we are currently detaining. The official added that this is most likely a form of telephonic protest to the EO. Please advise all your personnel not to engage the callers nor respond to any questions. Ensure all requests for information are referred to the Office of Public Affairs. In the 24 hours after the travel ban was implemented, the Office of Public Affairs was not responsive to questions about how many people were detained and whether they had access to medical care. Representative Jerry Connolly, a Virginia Democrat who went to Dulles Airport during the ban to try to get information on people being detained, told the Daily Beast he found CBP's behavior appalling appalling. I think it's outrageous, he said. Members of Congress have an Article 1 responsibility in the Constitution to oversee the executive branch, and it is completely improper and, from my point of view, extra legal for the CBP to decide they're going to ignore the elected representatives of the people. He added that CBP's Congressional Affairs Office didn't answer any of his questions during the ban, despite the fact that they were the only CBP component authorized to talk with members of Congress. They built a stone wall and gave us the middle finger, Connolly said. They feel they can do that with impunity because Trump's in the White House and Sessions is at the Department of Justice, and they can behave outside the law or inside the law if they see fit. The emails also show that CBP carefully monitored the airport protests. One email listed how many protesters were at major airports as of the evening of January 29th. 2,500 at JFK in New York, 1,000 at Dallas-Fort Worth, 1,000 at LAX, 800 in San Francisco, and 300 at Dulles. The email also noted that Representatives Maxine Waters and Ted Lieu asked for information at the Los Angeles airport and were directed to Congressional Affairs. In Los Angeles, officials staggered the release of arriving international passengers due to the protests and the resulting congestion at the airport. That email included several photos of protesters and noted that Univision filmed protesters at the San Antonio airport. It also noted that Senators Elizabeth Warren, Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Healey, Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe, Virginia Attorney General Mark Herring, and California Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom all made appearances at airport protests. The emails released to the Daily Beast had more than a dozen photos of groups protesting at airports. They were included in emails briefing DHS officials on the chaos unfolding at airports. The fact that Homeland Security officials shared these photos will concern some privacy advocates. This is something you'd expect from J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, said Jake LaPerouse, I'm guessing on that pronunciation, senior counsel to the Constitution Project. It's extremely disturbing, especially given DHS's history of cataloging Black Lives Matter protesters and President Trump's pledge to prosecute Black Lives Matter activists. Gabrus, the CBP spokeswoman, said officials shared the photos to track the response to the travel ban. Some field offices submitted pictures with their input for the daily report to provide a visual of port operations during the implementation of the executive order, Gabrus said. Photos were not requested or required as part of the daily reporting and have not been used for any other purpose than to provide a visual of operations at the airports. CBP also had at least one plainclothes police officer monitoring protesters in Detroit, according to the email, and CBP officers in Philadelphia were encouraged to wear plainclothes when they arrived for work at the airport because of the protesters. Federal judges later blocked the travel ban's enforcement. Months later, the Supreme Court reversed that, letting the White House put a narrower version of the ban back in place. CBP re-implemented the ban without any chaos, but members of Congress are still angry. What you've discovered does not surprise me, Connolly said of the FOIA documents. It just outrages me. Well, understandable at that. Let's finish up the show then with a little bit more in the way of data points to weave together our overarching narrative. I don't think I can weave them all together today, but I get the sense every once in a while that there are pieces that we've missed that really belong as part of our puzzle. One I'll go back to here is from the Washington Post, dated July 25th. Ann Applebaum is the writer here. The ugly way Trump's rise and Putin's rise are connected. That sounds like a very valuable piece of information. There were at least 8 people in the room on June 29th, 2016, when 2 Trump family members and Donald Trump's campaign manager met with a Russian lawyer, you know who, and her extended team in Trump Tower. I don't know if we got to all 8 of them or not, but at any rate, focus your attention just briefly on one of them, Ike Kavaladze. Now, I scanned around for a couple other articles that mentioned Kavaladze, and I've got a few in the wings, and I cannot recall whether we specifically discussed him or not. But if we didn't, we should have, and if we have, we need review. Of course, the article continues, it will be important to learn in due course what he was really doing there, but in the meantime, we should spend a few minutes thinking about the peculiar financial structure, American as well as Russian, that he represents. Though not exactly a celebrity, Kavaladze's notoriety in certain circles stretches back more than 2 decades. Starting in the 1990s, his company, Euro-American Corporate Services Incorporated, set up more than 2,000 Delaware corporations on behalf of unknown, mostly Russian clients, and used those companies to open bank accounts. I feel like we have discussed this on the air, but I can never be sure. But good review, even if we have. According to a Governmental Accountability Office report on suspicious banking activities, published in 2000, those bank accounts were then used to receive and send large amounts of money. What do we think is going on there? The GAO found that 2 banks facilitated the transfer of approximately $1 billion from Eastern Europe through U.S. banks and back to Eastern Europe by corporations formed for Russian brokers. More than $800 million in total was deposited in 136 accounts that Euro-American Corporate Services and other Kavaladze company, another one called, it's not even named here at this point, but another Kavaladze company created at Citibank alone. Let's recap that. If we can just read that sentence one more time. More than $800 million in total was deposited at 136 accounts at Euro-American Corporate Services and another Kavaladze company created at Citibank alone. There you have it. Kavaladze has protested that what he had done was legal, and he was right. Delaware law really was so lax that it allowed unnamed Russians to send money in and out of the United States without much question. Why did this matter? Because that kind of activity was a part of the business model that brought Vladimir Putin to power. As numerous books have documented, the best is Putin's Kleptocracy by Karen Dawisha. Putin was one of a group of public officials, many affiliated with the old KGB, who systematically pillaged the Russian state. They drew money out of the state, often using commodities arbitrage or other methods, moved the money out of the country through shell companies, then brought it back to Russia and used it to buy companies and property. They became rich, many of them fabulously so, and then they used their wealth to gain power. Soviet-born businessmen such as Kavaladze, based in the United States and Europe, played significant roles in this system, but so did a range of U.S. and European bankers, accountants, and lawyers. For 2 decades, Western real estate markets, New York, Miami, London, have also provided multiple safe places for Russian oligarchs and many others to spend money with complete anonymity. Last year, a Treasury Department investigation into shell companies that purchased luxury homes for cash in several U.S. metropolitan areas found that more than a quarter of such transactions in Manhattan and Miami actually involved someone engaged in suspicious activity. The arrangement suited everybody: American real estate magnates, suddenly rich Russian oligarchs, the construction industry, and many others. But underneath this boom, there was a grim truth. An important chunk of the money that pumped up the New York luxury real estate market over the past 2 decades was money originally siphoned off from the Russian state. That was money that should have been used to build hospitals, schools, and roads, but instead enriched officials such as Putin and the billionaires who surrounded him. In due course, Russian money also enriched Trump and his family. As Donald Trump Jr. said in 2008, Russians make up a pretty disproportionate cross-section of a lot of our assets. In that sense, the rise of Trump and the rise of Putin are connected. No wonder Trump feels such an affinity for the Russian president. No wonder he seeks him out in international meetings. And no wonder Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation has reportedly decided to look closely at past Trump family real estate transactions. I'm sure there will eventually be a lot more to say about the details of Trump-Russia's financial relationship, but this story should make us ponder some larger themes, too. After all, the double rise of Trump and Putin might have been halted if only Western governments and financial institutions had acted over the past 2 decades as if they truly believed that these kinds of dealings are wrong. Laws were not enforced or did not exist. Blind eyes were turned. Even now, we could be doing much, much more. We could stop the registration of all anonymous companies in states such as Wyoming, Delaware, and Nevada. We could make all property owners put their real names on public registers. We could listen to Global Witness and other activist groups that constantly point out the links between financial deals in New York and human rights abuse and poverty in faraway countries. Some of these changes are happening in Britain and Europe, but in the United States, where the political consequences of this ugly international system are now so dramatic, we have scarcely begun. I think an excellent point. I don't know how else to put it. But we're coming to the conclusion quickly that there was a lot of wrong done over a very long period of time that has left us with this incredible mess. I want to turn to another seemingly, for the moment, unconnected but relevant feeling story here. This first, I guess, grabbed my attention watching Chris Geithner tweet about this. And all I grabbed at the time was a screen capture that Chris had included in his tweets from, what's the date on these things? From July 25th, right around the same time, I guess. And this was, he just put it this way, breaking Feinstein statement, details Senator Feinstein, details Benkowski's representation of Alpha Bank, and wow, and of course the Alpha Bank words caught my eye. So I took a look at the screen caps here. They are taking a look at Trump's nominee to head the criminal division at the Department of Justice, a Mr. Benkowski. Who is this Benkowski? I grabbed a Washington Post article that covers the same material. And, but I wanted to start with this statement that Chris grabbed and said, wow, to. It's Brian Benkowski, whom the Post article describes as a veteran Republican lawyer who served as staff director of the Senate Judiciary Committee under Senator Jeff Sessions, who's now, of course, Attorney General. So it's not surprised that one of his top aides would come on at a top job at the Justice Department. But let's take a look at what Feinstein was highlighting in her statement here. Mr. Benkowski has been nominated by President Trump to head the criminal division at Justice. And think about what that entails, right? The criminal division, as I think most people know, is responsible for enforcement of all federal criminal law in our country. It's an important position for the rule of law in this country. And just thinking back to the article we just read about how important it is to actually enforce the law where it exists, or to make sure that the laws that you need to impose any kind of order, at least in the financial sector, that need to exist, the criminal division is going to have a lot to say about that. As she says, it's an important position for the rule of law in this country, clearly. We must assess today, in this nomination, considering this nomination, whether Mr. Benkowski is qualified to lead this division. Sure, gotta know that. And that includes the propriety of his representation this year of Alpha Bank, and we all know about them. This is the Russian bank that the media reported had been federally investigated for potential connections between its servers and the Trump organization. Right? Remember this? I don't know what investigations there were, if any, so we have requested a briefing, and I want to thank the chairman for helping to facilitate that briefing with the Justice Department. I very much appreciate that Mr. Benkowski has agreed to speak publicly about his work for Alpha Bank, and I think it's an important topic to understand given the position he's been nominated for. As I understand it, she continues, Mr. Benkowski participated in President Trump's transition team from September of last year to January of this year. He led the transition team's work at the Justice Department, which is now led by his former boss, Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Mr. Benkowski, let's see, I got to skip back to this, and a little bit of this is covered up here. Mr. Benkowski told the committee that the retention of former FBI Director James Comey was discussed by those on the transition team, including himself. How surprising is that? And our continued statement then reads, in March, within 2 months of leaving the transition team, Mr. Benkowski agreed to represent Alpha Bank. This is after being on the transition team, after the news had broken about what Alpha Bank was suspected of having done with regard to the Trump organization. Now, specifically, his work for Alpha Bank went to the heart of the reported investigations. He worked with a computer forensics firm to determine any ties between servers of Alpha Bank and the Trump Organization, and also whether and how private server information had gotten out of the ban. That's what it says. Additionally, he reviewed the Steele dossier, a private investigator's file on alleged links between Russia and the Trump campaign. He did this for Alpha Bank to consider suing BuzzFeed for defamation over their online publication of the dossier. Alpha Bank, in fact, did sue BuzzFeed on May 26th of this year. In April, while Mr. Benkowski was working for Alpha Bank, Attorney General Sessions' chief of staff asked him about his interest in leading the criminal division. Mr. Benkowski's law firm then notified Alpha Bank of his potential nomination for the Trump administration, but the fact that Mr. Benkowski continued representing Alpha Bank until the day of his nomination, which was in June 6th, raises questions. I should say so. After he found out about his potential nomination, why did he continue representing Alpha Bank? It is clear to me that Mr. Benkowski is knowledgeable about issues related to an ongoing investigation, so I asked before this hearing if he would commit himself to recusing not only from cases involving Alpha Bank, his former client, but also matters within Special Counsel Mueller's investigation. Guess what he said about that? He said he would not commit to recusing himself. I'm concerned with his refusal, why is this blocked? Here we go. I'm concerned with this refusal, especially given the position for which he has been nominated. So I look forward to hearing from the witness on this point. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Well, the Washington Post reported on the balance of the hearing, and I thought I might skim over some of that as well. President Trump's nominee to lead the Justice Department's criminal division told senators Tuesday that he once represented a Russian bank that was alleged to have a Trump Organization connection, but he cast that representation as a routine part of his legal work and forcefully asserted that he would be an independent and fair-minded law enforcement official. Brian Benkowski, a veteran Republican lawyer who served as staff director of the Senate Judiciary Committee under Sessions and helped manage the Justice Department transition for the Trump team, acknowledged that he represented Alpha Bank, a Russian financial institution, earlier this year. The institution was referenced in a dossier containing unproven and sometimes salacious allegations about Trump and his advisors and their possible Russian connections, and Slate raised questions about communications between servers for the bank and the Trump Organization. Benkowski said he was asked by a partner in the firm, Kirkland & Ellis, to help represent Alpha Bank, which wanted to conduct an internal investigation of the server communications. Benkowski said he hired and oversaw a digital forensics firm, a Stroz Friedberg, to examine computer traffic that came on the bank system in February and March with an eye on ultimately taking the findings to the FBI and the Justice Department. The representation was first reported by the New York Times. Benkowski said the review he oversaw uncovered no links between the Trump Organization and Alpha Bank. He said he had been scheduled to meet with the FBI and the Justice Department to present some findings, but before the meeting occurred, he had begun having conversations about a Justice Department job and told Alpha Bank he could no longer participate in the meeting. Benkowski said he was also asked by Viet Din, the partner who brought Alpha Bank to the firm, to assess whether Alpha Bank could substantiate a defamation case against BuzzFeed, which published the salacious dossier. The bank's owners ultimately did file a lawsuit. Benkowski declined to say what advice he provided. Investigators probing possible coordination between the Trump campaign and the Kremlin have looked into the allegations contained in the dossier about Alpha Bank, but have not found evidence of suspicious activity, according to people familiar with the probe. Benkowski said he would recuse himself from any matters involving the bank for 2 years and would permanently step aside from any matters that touched on his work for the institution. So I guess by testimony time he was willing to discuss recusal. Legislators pressed Benkowski on his representation of the bank, given his role in the Trump transition and discussions about coming on in a more permanent capacity. He defended working for the institution, saying it was in line with the work he had done throughout his career in the private sector. Before joining Kirkland & Ellis, Benkowski worked as Chief of Staff for the Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General, Chief of Staff to the Director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and Principal Deputy Attorney General for Legislative Affairs. I was a lawyer in private practice, doing what lawyers in private practice do, Benkowski said. That's interesting, but of course, whatever. We'll leave it at that. Benkowski's confirmation hearing came as the president continued to publicly criticize Benkowski's former boss, Sessions. We all know about that episode, leaving the Attorney General's future in doubt. The president and his Attorney General have had a falling out over Sessions' decision to recuse himself from the probe into whether the Trump campaign coordinated with the Kremlin to influence the 2016 election. Benkowski said he had every confidence that Sessions had reviewed the facts, applied the law, and made the right decision for the department on that basis in stepping aside from the probe. He also defended Special Counsel Mueller, who has come under attack by Trump. Benkowski said he did not agree that Mueller's probe was a witch hunt, a term the president has used to describe it, and he praised Mueller's admirable history of public service. He is someone who is widely understood to be a man of integrity, a man of independence, and someone whom I believe will conduct this investigation with those characteristics right at the forefront, and I also believe he'll insist on those same things from the people who work for him, Benkowski said. Very politic. Benkowski declined to say whether he would step aside if Trump ordered Mueller's firing, suggesting he would have to factor into such a decision the disruption it would cause the department. The Criminal Division is responsible for the bulk of the Justice Department's criminal work, including on violent crime and public corruption. And Benkowski noted his work was not likely to intersect with Mueller's. It better not. That's all I can say. That's actually the end of the report there, and a good time because it's about time to hand things over to the guys who will bring you the after show today. But, yeah, what a situation. How interesting would that be to have the guy who heads the Criminal Division? I don't know where, I'm not sure. I mean, one of the things, if Mueller were to be fired, you'd have to look at the hierarchy of the DOJ and see, well, who would be doing the firing and who steps into what role if he's gone. And I guess it doesn't really go down the DOJ chain of command. It would never fall to him to handle the investigation, but it would, it could actually cause some fairly serious disruption in the sense that, you're talking about Mueller investigating areas where he worked as a defense attorney right in the middle of all this. I mean, working for Alpha Bank, and gee whiz, now he oversees that division of the DOJ outside of the special counsel's purview. Anyway, that would be making legal determinations about whether or not there really was any sort of illicit communication between the Trump organization and the Alpha Bank servers. And, professionally, he already came to that conclusion, of course, on behalf of Alpha Bank. And lo and behold, he found, while he was in private practice, that there was nothing untoward going on here. And wouldn't it be great if the Department of Justice agreed? Well, he was about to have a meeting in which he would pitch his case to get them to agree. But now he'll be on the other side of the table in position to agree with himself, unless, of course, he recuses himself, in which case he'll end up drawing the ire of President Trump in all this. It's a hell of a thing. But, I have a feeling his nomination is going to sail through. Part of that, of course, our own fault and my doing, I guess, in helping them get rid of the filibuster for executive nominations. Well, it was difficult to anticipate a Trump presidency, although others said, what if you come up with a crazy Republican in the future? And that's not hard to imagine. I guess we could have given it some more thought, but I was being ideologically consistent and also crossing my fingers that we weren't going to get a total, complete nihilist moron as president, but I guess I was wrong on that count. All right. As I said, time to hand things over to the guys on the after show. No telling what brilliance they will have for you today, but I promise you it will be reflective of the morning's headlines and the latest news in ways that we haven't been able to be with our pre-recorded show, but I hope you enjoyed it.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Once again, thanks for bearing with us during our vacation period here. You got to take a vacation at some point and unwind, even though it doesn't feel like much of a vacation, as I've worked pretty hard in putting these recorded shows together for you. I hope you enjoyed them as much as I enjoyed making them, despite the fact that they were hard work, and maybe because of it. I'll see you again soon.